Today's episode of This Week in Startups is brought to you by Squarespace, an all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create a professional website and now an online store. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase on new accounts, go to squarespace.com and use the offer code TWIST. And by InVision. Find out why so many hot startups are using InVision to prototype, present, and collaborate on design in real time. Sign up for a 90-day free trial today at invisionapp.com/twist.
Hey everybody, it's Jason Calacanis, and on today's This Week in Startups, I have two amazing speakers who spoke to my incubator where 7 companies are growing over 12 weeks for a grand launch at the Launch Festival on March 2nd. Tonight we had Nir from a book called Hooked, and he teaches you how to build a behavioral hook in your product to get people addicted to it. It's an amazing psychological talk that dovetails with product design. Then Sahil from AdStage, which is one of my investments, teaches you how to do content marketing and advertising to build your customer base. And he did this with AdStage to get his first 10,000 business-to-business customers for a couple of $100s. He's brilliant as well. You're going to learn a lot on this episode. Stay tuned.
That's what it's all about, man. They said money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you. Yeah. Money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you.
So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Today we're going to be looking at habit-forming technologies, because if there's one thing that we all know about these gadgets that we carry around with us in our pockets, is that they have a profound impact on our day-to-day lives and our day-to-day behaviors. And so what I've been doing over the past several years is to try and look at what patterns we can see in these products that tend to change people's day-to-day habits in a relatively short period of time. And so I wanted to look at what is it about these companies, what patterns do we see repeated time and time again, so that we can learn from these products and incorporate some of the lessons into the products that we build. And so one of the first patterns I noticed is that these companies tend to start off as toys, as these nice-to-haves, as these products that are oftentimes dismissed as a feature of somebody else's product. And yet, within the span of 5 to 10 years, these products that kind of come out of nowhere are touching the lives of hundreds of millions, if not billions, of users, and they're making hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars. So who am I talking about? What companies come to mind? Facebook, of course, the $300 billion behemoth that many of us, when we first saw the company, we thought, okay, it's a slightly better MySpace, it's another Friendster, and we didn't imagine that it would become as huge as it is today, touching 1 in 7 people on the face of the earth. Tremendous, right? What else? Uber. Instagram. Yeah, Instagram's a great story, right? 12 people, 18 months, $1 billion acquisition by Facebook. And it turns out that they got a steal for that company, because now it turns out if you separated that company from Facebook, it'd be worth somewhere around $35 billion just for that company. And of course, who did Facebook buy fairly recently? WhatsApp for $22 billion. This silly little messaging service, right, that kind of came out of nowhere. Well, what makes WhatsApp so valuable, part of what makes that company so valuable, is that 74% of people who have that app installed use it every single day. Talk about the tremendous power of habits. So I've spent the past several years studying what is it about these companies that can so quickly and profoundly change users' day-to-day lives. And I wrote this book called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, along with my co-author, Ryan Hoover, which many of you might know Ryan from Product Hunt. So we worked on this book together for several years, and today I'll kind of give you a high-level overview of what we discovered in these patterns that we found. But I'll give you a little bit of warning in that the book is 250 pages. I teach the content of the book in a class at Stanford Graduate School of Business at the design school there. It's a 3-week course, but today I've got 30 minutes. So I'm going to condense a lot of information into a very short period of time, but we'll leave some time for Q&As. And of course, feel free to stop me along the way if you have any questions. But I just want to give you kind of a high-level overview of this model so that you can go out and use some of this knowledge yourself. So let's start with what is a habit. Basic definition of a habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. It's about half of what you do every day in and day out, is done purely out of habit. These behaviors done with little or no conscious thought. And I believe that we're on the precipice of an age where we can use habits for good. And I'm not alone, because there is an explosion of companies today who are using the psychology of habit design to help people live happier, healthier, more productive, more connected lives. And that's what I want to help you do tonight. So here's the basic pattern. Here's the pattern that we see repeated time and time again within the product experience of these companies that helps form consumer habits. It's called the hook. The hook is an experience designed to connect your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. Connecting your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit, and it's through successive cycles through these hooks that customer preferences are changed, that tastes are formed, and that these habits take hold. So let me walk you through these hooks. They start off with a trigger, through an action, to a reward, and finally an investment. So every hook, every habit-forming product starts with a trigger. A trigger is a cue to action. And these triggers come in two types, two flavors of triggers, if you will. We have our external triggers and we have our internal triggers. External triggers, we in the design community are very familiar with, right? This is kind of our trade. We see these every day. These are things that tell the user what to do next with some piece of information, right? What to do next is in the trigger itself. Click here, buy now, play this, a friend telling you through word of mouth about this great new app you should try out. All examples of external triggers. So we know all about these. As designers, as product developers, we build external triggers every day. We see them every day as consumers. But what a lot of product people don't realize the importance of is how critical it is to form associations with internal triggers. Internal triggers are these things that tell the user what to do, that prompt the next action, but the information for what to do next is not in the trigger itself, but instead informed through an association in the user's mind. So what we do in response to being in a certain place, a certain situation, around certain people, in a certain routine, and most frequently when we experience particular emotions, tells us what to do next, prompts us with the association and the information for what technology to turn to. And it turns out the most frequent internal triggers are at the top here, the emotions. But not just any emotion. Specifically, they are negative emotions. So what we do when we're feeling bored or lonesome or indecisive or lost or uncertain, what we do when we experience these negative emotions dictates the instantaneous associations that prompt us to action. Some of the evidence that shows this is the case comes to us from a study that found that people suffering from clinical depression check email more.
Hey everybody, let me take a moment to tell you about Squarespace. Yes, Squarespace is such an amazing product. And hey, we're here on the Incubator episode talking about great products and hooks. There is no better hook than using Squarespace to make a beautiful product. It's redesigned now with their 7 interface, and you can go see that at squarespace.com/7. You'll get more information on it. But they did a partnership with Getty Images, so you can make your template look gorgeous. You can do these beautiful cover pages. And of course, everything is so simple to use. We use it for all of our sites here, and we don't need to have a developer on staff. We don't need to have HTML, CSS, responsive design. All this nonsense is just taken care of us by the team at Squarespace, and they charge us only $8 a month, and you get a free domain if you buy Squarespace for the year, which is what you should do. And everything comes with commerce as well. So if you want to do commerce, you don't have to buy a third-party service for thousands of dollars a year. It just comes with Squarespace. Go check out Dreaming with Jeff, which is their amazing collaboration with Jeff Bridges. Yes, the Jeff Bridges from Tron and from a million other movies. The dude is amazing. Dreaming with Jeff is this really quixotic, crazy website, and I was checking it out on my phone. It looks gorgeous on your phone. And he's making all this beautiful music for you to sleep to. Anyway, it's really weird and cool and beautiful, and you can see what a Squarespace design can do at Dreaming with Jeff. So you can do a trial with no credit card because they're baller and they know you don't need to have a credit card. They're so confident that you will sign up and pay for the service because you're going to get so much value from it. It's amazing. It used to cost, I would estimate it would cost $25,000 to $250,000 to build a website that looks like a Squarespace website today. And you can do that all for such a small amount of money, dollars a month. Use the promo code TWIST if you keep your website, and you'll get 10% off your first purchase, and it will show that you support This Week in Startups. So thank you so much to my friends at Squarespace. What a great team. What great supporters of This Week in Startups. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode.
Now think about that for a minute. Why do people suffering from clinical depression check email more? Well, it turns out that people suffering from clinical depression experience what psychologists call negative valence states. They feel down more frequently than the general population. And so what are they doing to boost their mood, to get out of that negative valence state? They're checking their devices more often than the rest of the population. And of course, we all do this to some degree. What website do people go to when they're feeling lonely? Where do they go? Facebook, of course. And what about when you're unsure, when you're uncertain about something? Before you scan your brain, what do? You Google it, of course. And what about when you're feeling bored? You know, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you have that big project you don't feel like working on right now. What do? Reddit. You go to Reddit and YouTube and Instagram and Pinterest and sports scores and stock prices. Lots of solutions for this painful negative valence state of boredom. We don't like that sensation of boredom. It feels bad, and we seek to get out of that state. So what do we do with this? How do we build better products, knowing the importance of these internal triggers? Well, it comes down to understanding your user's itch. That far too many product designers design just for the functional requirements of a product without considering the psychological requirements of their product and what their service does for their customers. So what I encourage you to do is to fundamentally understand that itch. Understand what is that itch that occurs throughout the user's day, frequently within the user's day, that you're going to attach the use of your product to. Let's do a quick case study here. Let's talk about Instagram. How many of you are Instagram users? Okay, great. Almost everybody. Terrific. What were the external trigger channels? How did people first find out about Instagram? What did they use? What channels? All right, Twitter, Facebook, word of mouth. And so on these channels, when you saw someone post a picture on Facebook, for example, you would see, hey, check out my photo on Instagram. You'd click on that external trigger. You'd install the app. Now you've got the app icon on your phone, and you start getting notifications from your friends. Those are all examples of external triggers. Let's talk about Instagram's internal triggers. Did you say you use Instagram? Do you remember the last thing you took a picture of?
Yes.
Can you share? Is it suitable for work?
Yeah.
And what was it?
It was a photo of the ferry building from a helicopter.
Oh, wow. Amazing. So you took a picture of the ferry building. You happen to be in a helicopter just on another Thursday. You're riding in your helicopter that day? Terrific. And what's your name?
Joshua.
Joshua. So I'm guessing that ferry building did not say, hey, Joshua, take a picture of me with Instagram, right? There was no information that told Joshua what to do. And yet, when he saw this thing that he wanted to capture, when he wanted to save this very special moment in his helicopter, looking at the ferry building, there was an association there that to capture the moment, to satiate this fear of losing the moment, the solution was Instagram. Instagram wins. And it may not be taking a picture of the ferry building from your helicopter. It might be a meal or a cute, your puppy dog doing something cute, some kind of moment that you fear that you might lose that moment forever. Of course, there was another company about 30 years ago that was all about capturing the moment. Anybody know what company I'm talking about? Kodak, right? The Kodak moment. Do y'all remember the Kodak moment? Most of us were kids when Kodak had all these commercials on television, but do you remember these schmaltzy commercials of the puppy dogs running through the grass and the kids who would someday leave the empty nest? My personal favorite commercial was the one they always had of Grandma blowing out perhaps her last birthday candles. Do you remember that commercial? This was a real commercial. I didn't make this up. Why did Kodak spend billions of dollars and almost 100 years teaching people about the Kodak moment? Well, they wanted to create this mental association that when you see a moment like this in your life, before it disappears into the ether forever, capture it with Kodak. Instagram did the same thing that took Kodak almost 100 years and billions of dollars. Instagram did with 12 people in 18 months by having users teach other users what the Instagram moment is all about. But of course, Instagram does much more than Kodak ever could, because Instagram is also a social network. So the more we use a product like Instagram, the more we begin to associate it with other internal triggers. When we're seeking connection, when we're bored, when we're feeling FOMO. Everybody know what FOMO is? Fear of missing out. It's actually in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as of 2 years ago. It's a real word in the dictionary today. We don't like this sensation of FOMO. It feels bad. It's a negative valence state. And whatever can get us out of that negative valence state consistently, that becomes the go-to solution that we turn to with little or no conscious thought. Okay? So that's a very brief introduction to triggers. Let's move on next to the action phase of the hook. The action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward. Let me show you some habit-forming products, and I want you to see just how simple these behaviors are. Something as simple as scrolling on Pinterest, or searching on Google, or what could be easier than hitting the play button on YouTube. These very simple behaviors done in anticipation of reward, and it turns out that there's actually a formula to help us predict the likelihood of these singular behaviors. It comes to us from a researcher at Stanford by the name of B.J. Fogg, and Fogg tells us that for any behavior, think about how powerful this formula is, any human behavior B, we need three things. We need sufficient motivation, sufficient ability. Ability is how easy or difficult something is, and a trigger must be present. Okay? Any human behavior, online, offline, doesn't matter, requires these three basic elements: sufficient motivation, ability, and a trigger every single time. Let's talk about these three elements. We talked about triggers already, but let's talk about motivation. Motivation is the energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior. And this is an area of psychology that psychologists have been arguing about for decades and decades, but Fogg gives us these 6 basic levers that we can use to change human motivation, to give people more energy to do a particular behavior. Because all of us as human beings, we seek pleasure and we avoid pain. We seek hope and we avoid fear. We seek social acceptance and we avoid social rejection. So every television commercial you've ever seen, every billboard you've ever seen, every bit of marketing copy you've ever seen fundamentally tries to use user motivation to increase people's energy for action using these 6 basic levers. A lot more to be said about this. There's a whole chapter about it in the book. But let's move on to the next part of B equals MAT. The A stands for ability. And when it comes to startups, the A is actually more important than the M. Ability is all about the capacity to do a particular behavior, how easy or difficult a behavior is to do. Because of course, the easier a behavior is to do, the more likely it is to occur. So here again, there are these 6 basic levers that we as designers can pull on to increase the likelihood of a singular behavior occurring by manipulating how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required. Brain cycles, this is a big one. You heard me talking about it earlier tonight about cognitive load, right? The harder something is to understand, the less likely it is that behavior will occur. Social deviance tells us that we become more likely to do something because we see other people like us doing it. And then finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done it before in the past. And this is why habits are so important. Because the more we do a particular behavior, the easier it becomes, it increases our ability, and therefore we become more likely to do it in the future. Habits have this repeater effect. What do we call this? It's called practice, right? The more we do it, the easier it becomes, the more likely we are to do it in the future. So Fogg puts together these three basic elements of motivation, ability, and triggers into this graph. It's actually really useful, I think, in a startup, in a product development context. If you've built this beautiful interface that you're pulling your hair out trying to figure out, hey, why aren't users doing the thing I want them to do? You can always ask yourself, you can go to the Fogg model and you can ask yourself, does the user have sufficient motivation? High motivation at the top, low motivation at the bottom. Does the user have sufficient ability? If a user has high ability, if something is easy to do, it's over here. If something is hard to do, it's over here. And if the user has sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, they cross that blue threshold. And if the trigger is present, the behavior will occur. Every single time. Online, offline, doesn't matter. How many of you have seen this before tonight? Oh, really? Oh, it's new to most of you. Terrific. Very good. Let's make this concrete. Think of the last time that a phone rang in your life, a phone rings in your life, and you did not pick up the phone. Okay, you didn't pick up the phone. Why didn't you pick up the phone? Give me a real reason. Bill collector. All right, bill collector. You didn't want to talk to the person. So even if the phone was right there next to you, super high ability, even if the phone rang, you heard the trigger, you lacked motivation. You lacked motivation, so you didn't cross the threshold. What's another reason you may not pick up the phone? You're with somebody else, yeah. You're with somebody else, you're in a meeting, maybe you're listening to this workshop right now. So that would be an example of even if you had very high motivation, even if you heard the phone ring, the trigger was present, you lacked ability. You know, if you got up in the middle of this talk, it'd be kind of socially awkward to pick up a phone call and get out of the room, or maybe you're talking to somebody, it's hard to do. It's too difficult to take that intended behavior. So it doesn't happen. What's one more reason that has to do with the trigger why you may not pick up the phone?
Battery.
Yeah, the battery's in, you didn't hear it ring, right? Maybe the phone's on silent. So think about it. Even if you really wanted to pick up the call, high motivation, even if the phone was right there next to you, you had plenty of ability, very easy to do, just pick up the phone right there next to you. If the phone never rang, if you never heard the trigger, no behavior can occur. I can't tell you how many times I'm called into these big expensive design reviews with some of my clients, and they put out the entire user flow in front of me, and I'm looking at everything they've built, and I'm asking myself, where's the trigger? What do you want the user to do here? Because for any human behavior, anything you want your user to do, every single time we need sufficient motivation, ability, and a trigger. Every single time. Okay? Don't be one of those companies that forgets the importance of these triggers. So let's take a look at Twitter over the years, another case study here, and take a look at how Twitter has evolved using this fundamental understanding of motivation, ability, and triggers. Here's Twitter back in 2009. Okay? Here's Twitter in 2010, and here's Twitter today. What do you see that's different from today, from 2009? What's changed over the years? What strikes you? Yeah.
Design.
Yeah, what about it? What about the design?
One primary action.
Right, one primary action, right? It's very clear what they want the user to do here, but look at all the triggers back here, right? What is a trigger? That would take you to another page that would tell you all about what and why it was a trigger and how is a trigger, and watch a video is a trigger, and sign in is a trigger, and click here is a trigger, and get started join is a trigger. That is a ton of cognitive load for the user to figure out what the hell you want them to do. And in all three cases, what has always been the intended behavior? What does Twitter always want people to do on this page? Sign in or sign up. That's always been the intended behavior. And so what Twitter figured out by reducing the cognitive clutter, by making it easier for the user to figure out what the heck you want them to do, they increased conversion, more people signed up, and they could start sending people through their 4 steps of the hook. Now, I know what someone's thinking. Someone in this room is thinking, yeah, but Nir, back in 2009, Twitter needed all this information, right? They needed to convince people about what, why, how, and Twitter is a place for friends, blah, 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 right? Wrong. Turns out that from interviewing people for my course and for the book, talking to people who actually saw this page evolve at Twitter, what I discovered was that users always had plenty of motivation when they landed on this page. No one came to that page by mistake. Nobody typed in twitter.com and said, oops, what's this? That happened never. Everybody came to this page with plenty of motivation. They heard about it from a friend. They heard about it on Oprah. They had tons of motivation when they came to this page, or they wouldn't already be there. And all Twitter had to do was to decrease the cognitive clutter to make the intended behavior more likely to occur. So the lesson here isn't, oh, build a landing page just like Twitter. That's not the lesson. The lesson here is how can you remove as much cognitive load as possible to make the intended singular behavior more likely to occur.
Yes, InVision is a product I use every day across 3 companies. Why? Design matters. And the design process is critical in making a startup succeed. We're doing the Launch Incubator right now, and we're having a heck of a time getting all these companies, all 7 of them, to the level of design I think is necessary to win today. And that's 8.5, 9 out of 10. And we don't give 8s here. So we had a lot of startups that were in the 5, 6, 7 range, and we kept pushing them to get past that 8. Score it from 1 to 10 with no 8s. That's what our mantra is here at Launch and the Launch Incubator and This Week in Startups. Well, you know what? If you use InVision and you get a great designer, you can build that process of, hey, here's the first idea, and you can click and put notes on the idea, get out of the email chain hell, get out of the chat room hell, and just very strategically put your notes on the design, and then ask people to follow up. Click off their email addresses to send it to them. And then you can see a dashboard and see who on your team has looked at what designs and how many comments were posted and how many were resolved. It's a heads-up dashboard for the design pulse of your company. This is critical if you're going to succeed. I use the product. 300,000 designers use the product. And the great design teams at MTV, Airbnb, Evernote, Adobe, Box, and Zendesk use it. Special offer for our Twist listeners. You get a starter plan for free for 90 days. That's unlimited screens, collaborations, real-time comments, sketch commenting, and more. And the sketch commenting I never used until this week. You can basically take an image and you can draw on it. You put little arrows, you can a squiggly line, whatever, circle something. And you can put notes in there. So I started, this is a little hack, I started doing copy in the InVision app. So if I want to put copy into an app, I'm like, you know what? This could be better copy. I just write the copy in there, and then I CC my copy editor, I CC my product manager, I CC my designer. Boom, the copy gets changed, right? Genius, amazing, and it will help you sell too, because you can build all kinds of prototypes for your partners in there. And I am using it to sell, and I am in sell mode. InVisionApp.com/twist, InVisionApp.com/twist, and follow at InVisionApp. This product will make your startup literally 5 to 10 times better. I am a super fan of InVision. I literally use the product every day for an hour or more per day. All right, let's get back to this amazing episode.
So after we figured out the user's itch, we figured out the simplest behavior in anticipation of reward, now it's time for the reward itself. And when we talk about rewards, we have to start in the brain. And in particular, an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which was first studied by 2 Canadian researchers by the name of Olds and Milner. And Olds and Milner discovered something very peculiar about this part of the brain. That when they connected the brains of lab animals to these tiny electrodes and allowed these lab animals to self-stimulate, they gave them a little lever to press on to send electrical current to activate their nucleus accumbens, what they discovered was that these lab animals wanted nothing else. They would forgo food, they would forgo water, they would run across painful electrified grids just to continue to activate this part of the brain. In later experiments done on people, they discovered similar results. That people allowed to self-stimulate this part of the brain with these little buttons did so incessantly. They would click hundreds of times. Some of these people had to have the machines forcibly removed from them to get them to stop clicking these little buttons to activate their nucleus accumbens. Well, it turns out you don't need electrodes to activate your nucleus accumbens because, in fact, your nucleus accumbens is activated every single day. Things like luxury goods, sex, junk food, and of course, right there in the center, technology, all activate your nucleus accumbens every single day. Now, for decades, Olds and Milner and much of the psychology community believed that the purpose of the nucleus accumbens was to activate pleasure, right? Why else would lab animals and later people incessantly activate this part of the brain if it wasn't because it felt good, right? Not exactly. It turns out that the way the brain stimulates us to action is not by activating pleasure per se, but instead activating what we call the stress of desire, wanting, craving, because it turns out that the brain becomes most active in the nucleus accumbens in anticipation of a reward. But when we actually get the thing we want, when we get the thing that's finally going to make us feel good and make us happy, that's when the nucleus accumbens becomes less active. So the way the brain stimulates us to action is by activating this little itch that we seek to scratch. And it turns out that there is a way to supercharge this stress of desire, this anticipatory response. Does anybody want to know how? Anybody curious? I'm doing it to you right now. So a bit of the unknown is fascinating. So when I took that little pause and I asked you a question and I waited for a response, right? Some of you perked up. What's it going to do next? What's going to happen? And it turns out that in all sorts of products that we find most habit-forming, we see this bit of mystery, a bit of the unknown. And this, of course, comes to us from the classic work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. Right? Skinner took these little pigeons, put them in a box, he gave them a little disc to peck at, and every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, at first, they would receive a reward. Peck at the disc, get a little food pellet. So basically, Skinner would train these pigeons to peck at this disc whenever they were hungry. But then Skinner did something a little bit different. He introduced a variable reward. So sometimes the pigeons would peck at the disc, nothing would come out. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was that the rate of response, the number of times each pigeon pecked at this disc, increased when the reward was given on the variable schedule of reinforcement. Why does this happen? Because we now know that variability spikes activity in the nucleus accumbens, stimulating this wanting, this stress of desire. And so in all sorts of products that we find most habit-forming, most engaging, the things that we find that capture our attention and won't let go, you will find one or more of these three variable reward types. Rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. So let me introduce these to you real quick. Rewards of the tribe is all about the search for social rewards. These are things that feel good, that have an element of variability, a bit of mystery, but come from other people. So the search for empathetic joy, feeling good because someone else feels good, competition, cooperation, all examples of variable rewards of the tribe. Best example I can think of online is, of course, social media. Right? When I open up my Facebook newsfeed, there's a lot of variability about what I'm going to see. What did people post? What are the comments going to say? How many likes does something get? High degree of variability around these variable rewards of the tribe. They come from other people. Next is the variable rewards of the hunt. Rewards of the hunt are all about the search for resources. So rewards of the hunt stem from our primal search for food and other material possessions. And of course, in modern society, we buy these things with money. So when many people think of variable rewards, they often think of gambling, they think of casinos, where the variable reward, you heard me mention the slot machine today, is of course the currency, right? The money that comes out of the machines. You're never quite sure what you might win. But it's interesting to see that we find the exact same phenomenon online when it comes to information rewards. So when you open up your Twitter feed, you find that, okay, maybe the first thing isn't very interesting, and then maybe the second thing isn't very interesting, but maybe the third or fourth tweet is super interesting. And so what do you have to do to get more of this information reward? What do you have to do? Just keep scrolling. So this scrolling and scrolling is very similar to pulling on a slot machine. Searching and searching and never done searching for these variable rewards of the hunt. Okay? Finally is the variable rewards of the self, the search for self-achievement. These are things that feel good, that have an element of variability, but don't come from other people and aren't about these material or information rewards. These are things that are intrinsically motivating. They feel good in and of themselves. The search for mastery, competency, completion, control, all examples of variable rewards of the self. So for example, games. Right? If I'm playing Candy Crush or the Kardashian game or Dots, I might not be playing with other people. There's no real material rewards involved, and yet there's something fun about getting to the next level, the next accomplishment, the next achievement. And even if you say to yourself, yeah, but Nir, I'm not much of a gamer, this never really appealed to me, I bet you play this game every day. Checking those unread messages in your inbox, or finishing the to-dos on your to-do list, or my favorite, when you've got that little icon telling you you've got a notification that you just have to open the app in order to clear it away, is an example of these variable rewards of the self. The search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. So one word of warning, before you say to yourself, great, I got it, Nir, I'm going to put variable rewards in my product and they're going to be super habit forming. The one word of warning is that variable rewards are not a free pass. That fundamentally there has to be a connection between the variable reward and the internal trigger. So if the internal trigger is boredom, then the variable reward damn well better entertain. If the internal trigger is seeking connection, loneliness, well then we have to connect people together in the variable reward phase. Because remember, the fundamental purpose of the reward phase of the hook is to give people what they want, to scratch the user's itch, and yet leave them wanting more. Have a bit of mystery involved with what they might find the next time they engage with your product. Which brings me finally to the last step of the hook, the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product for a future benefit. It's not about immediate gratification, it's about a future benefit. And the point of the investment phase is to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. And it does this, investments do this in two ways. Number one, investments load the next trigger. Investments load the next trigger. So for example, when I send someone a message on WhatsApp or any number of other messaging service, when I send someone a message, there's no immediate gratification, right? I don't get any points, I don't get any badges. There's no immediate reward to sending someone a message. What I'm doing by investing in that platform, by sending that message, is that I'm loading the next trigger because I'm likely to get a reply. And of course, what does that reply contain? An external trigger prompting me to go through the hook once again. Okay, so the first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by loading the next trigger. The next way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is by storing value. And this is one of the reasons I love working in technology. Because unlike things made of atoms, as opposed to things made out of bits, right? The things made out of atoms, these tables, your phones, your laptops, everything in the physical world depreciates in value with wear and tear, right? The more you use them, the less they're worth. But habit-forming technologies should do the opposite. Habit-forming technologies should appreciate with use, and they do this because of this principle of stored value. So the more content I put into iTunes, the better it becomes as my one and only music library. The more data I give to a site like Mint.com or Pinterest, for example, the more data I give these companies, the better the product becomes for me. I can do more with this product or service based on how much data I give to them. Followers, the more followers I have on a site like Twitter, the better the product becomes as a way for me to reach my audience. So if Twitter were to send out an email tomorrow that says, I'm sorry, Twitter is no longer free, you're going to have to start paying for it, who's more likely to start paying? Someone with 10 followers or 10,000 followers? Of course, it's going to be the person with 10,000 followers because they've stored all this value in the form of followers. And finally, reputation. Reputation is a form of stored value that users can literally take to the bank. Because on sites like TaskRabbit and Airbnb and eBay, my reputation score dictates what I can charge for my goods and services. I can literally take this stored value to the bank. And how likely am I to leave one of these platforms after I've accrued all this reputation? Right? Kind of hard to do. It's kind of hard to leave. So that's it. It's a very, very quick overview of the 4 basic steps of the hook model. These steps that we find are repeated time and time again in all sorts of habit-forming products, and that through successive cycles through these hooks, this is how customer preferences are changed, how tastes are formed, and how habits take hold. So I warned you that that would be a lot of information, and I'm sure it was, but there's a lot more information in the book, How to Build Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and this is the most important takeaway slide of the presentation. These are the 5 fundamental questions that you have to be able to answer if you need to build a habit inside your product. Number 1, what's the internal trigger that your product is addressing? What's the user's itch? Number 2, what's the external trigger that brings the user to the product? Number 3, what's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward? Number 4, is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And finally, what's the bit of work done to increase the likelihood of the next pass? Now, before I take a few questions, there's one more thing I want to talk about, and that is the morality of manipulation. I know what that nervous laughter is about. That many of you during this presentation were thinking to yourself, hey, is this okay? Is this kosher? Is this all right to do to people, to use their hidden psychology to change their behavior? Well, if you had that thought, bravo. I think that is the appropriate reaction to this information because let's face it, anytime we are changing people's behaviors to meet our ends in mind, that, my friends, is a form of manipulation. And the products that we're building here, these are the products that people are taking to bed with them every night. It's the first thing they reach for in the morning before they even say hello to their loved ones. And as Ian Bogo said, our technologies are quite possibly becoming the cigarettes of this century. So what responsibility do we have as product designers, as innovators, as entrepreneurs, as investors? What responsibility do we have to use the psychology of habit design for good? Well, I encourage you to pick one of the world's problems. That is one thing that we have no shortage of. To engage people in something meaningful and something important, to help them live happier, healthier, more connected, more productive lives by using the psychology of habits for good. I encourage you, to paraphrase the words of Gandhi, to build the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so my question is on variability of rewards, a pigeon example. So it was funny, so when we presented, you got it right away, you're like, wow, this is a dopamine rush of this slot machine, something's gonna come out. And then you had said, well, it has to win every time. But you're saying the biggest sort of stimulation of that part of the brain, those rewards are variable.
Right.
So do tech products like a product like ours, does it truly have to produce every time? Or can you fail occasionally and then just go back and try it again, right?
So there's a lot to be said of variable rewards, and we can do class after class about variable rewards. Remember that there's lots of different ways that something can be interesting and exciting and variable. Right? We see variable rewards inside what makes great fiction, what makes a great movie, what makes a great game. It's all about mystery and uncertainty. So there's a lot of flavors of uncertainty that you could put in your app. It could be, did you get a deal or not? That's base level. It could be the uncertainty about what deal did you get? It could, where are you going? What are you going to eat? How much of a discount? What other friends also got the discount? There's a whole plethora of different ways that you can make it variable. What's important to recognize is that there's some areas that people will use a product to regain agency over things that are inherently variable, and that serves a purpose. So for example, Google and Uber would not want to make their products more variable. They're taking situations that are inherently variable. Searching for an answer has uncertainty at its core. Waiting for your taxi cab, if you remember before, Uber sucked. You'd call the cab company. They always tell you they're 15 minutes away. Sometimes they're 15 minutes away. Sometimes they're an hour away, and you have no control over that situation. Well, all of a sudden, Uber took something that was inherently variable, and by showing you the map of where the cab is, and it's not perfect, right? It has some flaws. It's not by the minute, but it gives you more agency and control over something that is inherently variable. So I think for your product, the reason that my gut reaction was the user has to get a discount every single time is because Feeding me is something I want agency over. I want to know I'm going to get fed, right? Don't fuck with that. I want to know my belly's going to be full because I'm hangry. You know hangry, right? A little bit hungry. You know hangry. You don't want to mess with hangry. So that's the part I think, and this is a guess, right? You're going to have to test it with your users as an educated guess. So that's the part I would not screw with. You will always get a deal. You will always get fed. What deal you get, how much of a deal you get, and what restaurant you get it at, that's the part I would make variable.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Please. Jason, just let me know on time, by the way.
It seems like we have a lot of presenters that show us like Twitter as this like thing that's grown into something great. I still find it epically confusing. I think I'm alone in San Francisco, but I am not from San Francisco.
You're going to get evicted pretty soon.
What is it? I'm a heretic. But like you should, it's like cognitive load. I saw an image of a screen that was 50% text that I couldn't read. And so, like, to me, it's, like, confusing because it seems easy and convenient to look at success stories and fit them into the narrative of, like, how to succeed. Because I totally agree with, like, it all makes sense. But then I look at Twitter and I'm like, no, Twitter betrays me all the time. Yeah. Like, that's how I feel. Yeah. Yet I still go back to it.
So this question is explain Twitter's success despite their horrible cognitive overhead. Right. Is that right? So,
yeah.
This is the trouble with asking for feedback and why you need to do a lot of user testing, as well as go with your own intuition to build products for yourself. As a user, you know what you want. But you know, anybody who's been in a startup will tell you that startups are a war of attrition. That you're never going to have a product that you say, oh my God, now everybody loves it. That's never going to happen. That these wars in a startup are these wars of attrition. It's making it marginally easier and marginally more appealing. Exactly. And appealing to a bigger and big market by making these small UX changes that you learn over time. You never wake up and say, oh my God, I've got it. This is what the UX needs to look like, period.
And it's not saying that that's perfect. It's not saying, look over here, there's 30 options, and over here it's just one, or two.
Exactly. It's never done. I mean, God, how many people don't get Snapchat? Oh my God, there we go. The Snapchat UX is pretty darn difficult to use. But if you've been trained, the secret is if somebody takes you, and says, hey, come here, let me show you this one time, as high school kids do, as college kids do, you're done. You know how to use Snapchat, So you're in the club. Exactly.
tell me what the best little hook that you've ever seen is overall, because people must be hitting you with them all the time, and then tell me the one that recently that's impressive.
So just top of mind, I think what Pinterest does, I've been a Pinterest fan for a long time. Their offices actually used to be right next to mine. Back when I was at my last company, AdNectar, and they were like right next to us, and I wish I would have joined them at the time. But anyway, Pinterest does something that's really amazing in that very few companies can blend their onboarding, which is a growth problem, right? Growth has nothing necessarily to do with engagement. They're kind of two separate things, and you have to work on them. They feed into each other, but they're not the same thing, clearly. But what Pinterest does that's really beautiful is that their very first hook is the onboarding. So you can participate in Pinterest and look around and check it out. And it's so cool, and you're just the consumer of the information. And that's, of course, the variable rewards are, this wall of interesting objects, right? Searching through these interesting things. But then eventually you decide you want to invest. You want to join. You want to comment. You want to like. You want to pin something. You want to create a pin board. And now they've got you in the investment phase, which loads the next trigger, right? Because you log in, you authenticate probably with Facebook. And so now when your friend Jenny does something on Pinterest, you're going to get a notification that's going to bring you back again. And now you become a creator. You're not just a consumer. You're now a creator of the content itself. And that's pretty rare. To be able to make the first hook, the onboarding hook, and make that just so seamless and create that habit from the get-go is pretty impressive. So they've done that masterfully. And then recently, I have to think of, Product Hunt. Product Hunt is one of the first products that I can point to and say was influenced from the beginning from the hook. Ryan Hoover, actually, funny story, talk about like gumption and just doing it. He used to work at a company he wasn't all that happy with. He had a lot of free time on his hands, and in late 2012, he wrote this blog post that was titled 13 People I Want to Meet in 2013. And you might have been on the list, and Eric Ries was on the list, and Steve Blank, and like a lot of people in Silicon Valley were on the list, and I was on the list. Well, somebody forwarded this to me, and so I tweeted at Ryan and said, "I'm here. Like, just come on down. Like let's have a burger or coffee or something." So we had a burger together, and he told me about how he really liked my stuff. He'd read it online in a few different publications, and he just wanted to help. He's like, "Hey, what can I do to help you?" And so I said, I've been wanting to put together this little PDF of some of my blog posts into something that looks like a book. Do you think you might want to help me? So we worked together for the next 3-4 months ago. We put this stuff together. He helped me kind of get it organized and find the pieces that were missing, and then we self-published the book. Well, the next thing that Ryan Hoover does is go build Product Hunt. And 110% of the credit belongs to Ryan, because implementation is the hard part. This theory stuff is the fun and easy part. At least that's what I think. The doing part is actually the hard part. But he actually was very thoughtful in the product around using this hook, and he's improved it over the years, looking at this model of how can I improve the investment phase? How can I improve the variable rewards? How can I improve these different parts of the hook? And so I think it's a really habit-forming product, that when you get that Product Hunt email, you're going to open the Product Hunt email, right? It's very sticky, I think.
Have you seen an example of a company that had the perfect hook, those 4 phases, and it didn't work?
All the time.
All the time.
Let me be very clear here. This is not magic pixie dust. This is not do this, form a habit, and your company is going to be the next Facebook, right? That's not how it works. That when I look at a company, my quick and dirty assessment of do I want to angel invest in a company is GEM. And I don't know who came up with this. I need to find who the author of this stuff is, but maybe, Jason, do you know have you heard GEM before? Like growth, engagement, monetization, that 3. So that's what I look for. It's basically a business model in a nutshell. So growth, engagement, monetization. So every startup I invest in has to have 2 out of the 3 and a plan for the 3rd. That's my test. Right? If they have all 3, they're not a startup anymore. They're a real company. So this is only engagement, because each of those 3 things is necessary but not sufficient. If you nail engagement, if you've got the best hook ever, and people are totally habituated, they're using it multiple times a day, but there's only 10 of them, and you've got no way to monetize them, you've got diddly. Right? So you have to have all 3. It's necessary but not sufficient. So I've seen companies that nail engagement, and they just, for the life of them, can't figure out an economic way to grow, and they can't figure out a way to monetize. They don't have a company. I will tell you that I would rather invest in a company with amazing engagement and a plan to monetize, right? But maybe they don't have growth yet, but they can buy growth profitably. I'll invest in that company 10 out of 10 times. What I won't invest in is a company that, oh my God, we figured this amazing new viral channel and we're growing like crazy, but everybody who comes, they don't stick around. Our engagement sucks. That's called a leaky bucket. And we've seen lots of those companies kind of come and go, and those kind of companies.
All right, well, thanks everybody for having me. I liked a lot of your companies, don't get me wrong. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about how AdStage today grew to about our first 10,000 B2B signups. And so just a quick background, not myself, but about AdStage, so just to qualify the presentation. So we build a self-serve platform where you can build, deploy, and manage your ad campaigns across multiple ad networks from the same place. So Google, Facebook, Bing, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So very quick about the company, 16 people, 10 engineers now. We've raised close to $9 million. Launch Fund is one of our investors. We actually raised previously to going to launch, so it was a little bit of a different dynamic for us. We were a 1.0 company at the same time, and we're based right here in San Francisco. Everyone is. So a couple things. So I'm going to talk about, today I'm going to talk about is content versus paid advertising, when you should use both of them or when you should use just one of them. And so very quickly we'll go through both. So on content, it positions you as a thought leader. It's really powerful for that reason. I think a couple of you did mention that content marketing is really important to at least your user acquisition strategy. Keep at that. I think it's very important for the long run. It's low cost, right? Paid advertising obviously requires you to pay a little bit of money. And so this can be really powerful if you can write content that isn't about your business directly, but is complementary or beneficial to your user base. And then on the paid ad side, a couple things that it's really beneficial for is it can expand your reach. So the problem with content is that you're really focusing on your existing organic user base. And of course, when you're running advertising, you're paying to buy more audience, right? So that's the fundamental piece. There's also some really cool kind of, they're not as long-term viable, but there's things that you can do against your competitors with paid advertising. There's things that you can do in the early days to run really, really inexpensive campaigns to make sure that your brand gets clicked on. And we're going to walk through a few of these. So at AdStage, what we did in our first, let's say, call it a year and a half of existence, was we used low-cost advertising and content marketing to put together what I call our pufferfish strategy, which is look bigger than you really are, right? So we're going to go through content marketing first, and we're going to talk about the benefits, the types of content to create. Now that you have all this content, how do you promote it? And then at the very end, my favorite piece is how do you recycle that content? Because it would suck to just use that content one time, right? So let's talk about the benefits of content marketing. So of course, it can improve your SEO and drive more traffic to your site. A lot of your businesses here, especially the web products, are going to really be dependent on SEO. It's going to be very important for you to rank high. There's a whole science to SEO. You should definitely dig into it, right? It attracts qualified leads. So this is really important. When you're writing content, first of all, don't write random content. Second of all, try not to write a lot of self-perpetuating content about your business. Try to write content that is beneficial to your user base, how-tos, guides, things that are going to help your users build trust in your brand, and therefore you hope that they'll actually trust your product, right, or your service. And then finally, try to position yourself as a thought leader. So in our case, we're an advertising company, so we write a lot of guides and how-tos, and our goal is to make people think that we're really smart and we know what we're doing, right? And hopefully we are. And then they'll use our product, and at least they'll trust it, at least at the beginning, and we can totally fuck that up, but let's hope we don't. So the types of content you want to create. So there's all sorts of types of content. We're getting into the age where content is the new ad type. In general, content is what we're sharing on Twitter in short-form content or long-form content. So let's talk about a couple types that we use at AdStage. So the first type are newsletters. So a couple of you guys actually do use newsletters. I think they're an incredible type of content because you don't have to make them incredibly frequent. But when you do send them out, it's asynchronous, right? So users can actually ingest the content when they want to. And that's great because you're not forcing it upon them. The problem with Twitter is it's real time. They have to see it. They have to be on at that given time. They just released a feature that actually helps with that. But in any case, it's used differently, right? Another type of content is a little bit more short-lived. It's news. So recently, Facebook actually launched a new type of targeting parameter, an audience network, right? And immediately when they launched that, we wrote about it. Not because this is going to be a good piece of evergreen content that we could rely on for a long time to get traffic from it, but because we're going to get a quick spurt in traffic. Because everyone is searching about this new thing that Facebook launched, and they want to learn a little bit more about it. So they're going to gobble up that article. Now, the last two pieces of content here are my favorite, and they're more what we call evergreen content. So how-tos and guides. Evergreen content, how many of you guys here know what evergreen content means? Right, so evergreen content is the type of content that can be reused over and over and over again. Right? It's not a one-time use. That's the reason why I like it, because we don't, as a small startup, you don't have a lot of resources to continue to create tons of content. But in the case that you create a good piece of evergreen content, you can repurpose it, you can reutilize it, right? The other reason why I like guides and how-tos, if you have the business in which that makes sense, is you're immediately giving a value exchange, right? The users are going to invest their time and read your piece of content, but if they can walk away with a few actionable pieces, let's say that you give them 5 tips, even if they walk away with 1, you hope that that covers the cost of them reading your content for 5 minutes, right? And that's always great. So a pro tip here is within your company, if you have domain experts, so in our case, our marketing team is not just our marketing team, but all of our customer success folks were all advertisers previously. Why don't they write content for us? They can write guides and how-tos. They're dealing with their customers every single day. So you don't just need a killer marketing team to write your content for you. You can leverage anybody in your company who knows your space. So here's a quick example of the newsletter we send out every week, every Tuesday morning, called This Week in Ad Tech. And it's basically it's a compilation of articles and how-tos and trends in the ad tech space that we send out. And we've actually started this newsletter as an internal reading list that our marketing guy would send to our team. And the reason for this was we actually had no idea what we were doing in the ad space. We need to learn about it. And so this is how we learned about it internally. Then we thought, well, hey, this is really valuable for us. Why don't we send it to our customers? They might find it valuable too. Now notice that we don't talk about AdStage at all in this newsletter. And we now send this over to over like 15,000 folks, 15,000 marketers every Tuesday morning. It still has close to a 30% open rate after a year and a half, which is pretty good, right? And the top article is written by us, but it has nothing to do about us. And everything else is just an aggregation, right? So that's a quick example. So let's jump in now to the ways that we actually promote this content. So you spent all this effort and time creating a ton of content. How do you get it out there? How do you syndicate it? How do you get your partners to share it? Just a couple things you can do. Of course, I'm here to talk about some of the advertising things you can do. So the thing that's changed on social media and social media advertising in general is that the ad type is content driven, right? When you were talking about paid search advertising, it was your headline and your 2 lines of body text. That was it. And it was intent based. But social advertising is about consuming or discovery of content or discovery of interests, right? That's what you're doing on Facebook, that's what you're doing on Twitter, and that's certainly what you're doing on LinkedIn. Now, each of them is a little bit different, and we'll talk about that in a second, and you have to actually position it differently. Another thing that you can do is organic, right? So of course, continue to build your organic Twitter following, continue to build your Facebook following. These organic users are great because you can hit them up more than once, and you don't have to pay for it, which is great, right? Now, finally, there's 2 other things I like to talk about. One is a little bit of a small hack. It's not going to be sustainable long term, but it's interesting to use, which are internal links. So let's say that in our blog, for example, we've written 180 posts. Let's say that you've started writing some posts. Whenever you can reference one of your existing posts that you've written, that's awesome, right? Because the idea here is you're actually keeping that given user in your loop if they click through, right? And it also actually improves your SEO rank for those given pieces of content as well, so you get 2 benefits from that. And finally, an email, the newsletter was a good example there. So here's what we do to continue to recycle our content and promote it is we use Buffer. There's tons of tools like Hootsuite, there's Buffer, I think Percolate does some of this as well. And the idea is anytime, and actually everyone on our business team, not just marketing, so sales, business development, myself, we log in, we all have the same Buffer access, and we can keep loading up pieces of content, whether they're our own or they're someone else's content. But of course we have a theme, right? Advertising, ad technology. And we can add those to our queue. And this way, every 30 minutes, we'll have a new tweet go out. If you guys go to AdStage on Twitter, you'll see these pieces of content that we're sharing. It's not somebody behind the computer. It's all scheduled, right? It's all automated. So finally, my favorite piece, which is content recycling. So you don't want to waste your time creating content and only have to use it once. That's the most important thing to say here. Always think of clever ways on how you can recycle that content. So the first thing we already talked about is share it via social. Keep getting it out there, keep using it over and over again, especially if it's evergreen content. You're not going to have a good time if you create something about something that Justin Bieber did one time. It's going to get really boring after a while, right? So another thing that you can do, and this is something that I think that we've done pretty well, which is embed the content in your actual product. So if you guys have a user interface as part of your product, try to actually embed that help content in your product. So for example, we have a bunch of tables, right, with a bunch of data in our product, ad data. So in our CTR column, when you hover over our CTR column, we don't just say CTR is click-through rate. We say CTR is click-through rate, which is clicks divided by impressions. And by the way, if you need help increasing your CTR, click here for our 5 tips on improving your CTR. And we actually embed one of our given guides. You can do this throughout your product, in your help sections, in your tool tips, and again, you're going to perpetuate that content. In fact, our LinkedIn guide that's at the top of our LinkedIn creation has over 12,000 shares now, an article on a startup blog. That's crazy, right? So finally, 2 other things. One is, again, another little hack is converting the format. So what we did with one of our popular blogs is we actually turned it into a SlideShare deck. And just by changing the format, we immediately got distribution on SlideShare, right? And it's a better format to pass to different people. So decks are things that salespeople love, right? So when LinkedIn became a good partner of ours, we just passed that deck over to LinkedIn reps, which is exactly what they wanted. They didn't want to pass around a blog, right? And then finally, add it to your campaigns. So these are your drip email campaigns as well as your paid campaigns. Try to create evergreen campaigns both on the drip side and on the paid side so they don't have short flights, and just keep adding things to them over time. You don't have to pause the campaign, just pause the ads or pause the pieces of content within them. So here's a quick example of one of our drip emails. So what we do is we know what networks the users are using. So let's say they're using search networks. So they're using Google or Bing. We'll start sending them content about how to be better at Bing or on Google and how to structure your PPC advertising. If they're on Facebook, we'll send them guides to Facebook. What we'll also do is called cross-pollination. So if we know that you're a Facebook user, you're probably more inclined to also want to try out LinkedIn or Twitter. So eventually we'll send you a guide that says, hey, have you ever thought about trying out LinkedIn? Here are 5 quick tips on if you want to get started on LinkedIn. All right, so that's the content side. So now I'm going to jump into the paid advertising side. There's this common fallacy in the space that everyone thinks that advertising is super expensive. There's a couple things that you can do that are incredibly cheap that every startup here should do when you get the check from the launch, from the incubator. You just start using a little bit of it on this. So we're going to start with branded search, which is a type of campaign that you can run. And then we're going to end with retargeting with custom audiences and then your traditional retargeting. So on the branded search side, So there's a couple benefits, right? Today, the problem is if you guys type your company names, you guys haven't launched, I guess, but once you launch, if you type your company names into Google, you're going to get a bunch of results. You might get a couple of TechCrunch articles, you might get a Wall Street Journal article or what have you, right? But the problem with that is you don't control the message on those articles. You only control the message on your search result that comes up. Branded search can help you control the message of that first page, which is incredibly important. If you guys use something like Crazy Egg, you guys use these like on your website, you track like the heat maps, right? It's insane what before the fold gets you and what drops off after the fold, right? Same thing happens on Google. So let's jump into branded search. So here's a quick example of if you type in AdStage in Google, you're going to see a ton of results, right? So you're going to see about our fundraising, you're going to see things about AngelList, so on and so forth. But the only actual result that we control is that top one on our website. And we control that metadata so we can control the message. But people can click on our Wall Street Journal article, but we don't really want them to, right? We want them to come and click on our site and hopefully convert to be a user. So how do we take control of that page? This is when you can start using branded search. A branded search campaign is really easy to set up. All you use for your keywords is your brand name. That's it. And because your brand names, in most cases, aren't very popular brand names, right? The auction is going to be incredibly cheap. You're going to pay in cents, right? And this way, your ad will always show on the top. And also, what Google does is you might say, well, hey, what if my competitor actually bids on my brand? Google knows that it's your brand, and they actually penalize your competitor. They charge your competitor more in the auction. So you're always hopefully going to win that top seat, right? And so you can see this in a lot of travel companies. If you go on Google, you type in Travelocity, you're going to see all those competitors lined up right under them, but they're going to be on the top, and they get a huge benefit from Google for that. So after running a brand campaign, now look at the page, right? We own the entire upper half of that given page. The first piece is actually an ad, right? And we use this thing called site links to put additional links on our given ad. And under that is our first organic result. So this is an actual screenshot of our spend. And in the last 7 days, we spent $30 to do this. That's it. So now I'm going to jump into retargeting. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is this new type of retargeting that both Twitter and Facebook have come up with. Google did it actually in a couple of different ways, but Facebook and Twitter executed really well. And it's called custom audiences. And Twitter calls it tailored audiences. They hate calling this stuff the same thing. It's all the same. Anyways, so what you can do in this case, it's really interesting. So you can actually upload emails, Facebook IDs, phone numbers. And let's say you're doing this on Facebook. Facebook will actually find those users, if they're Facebook users, and target your ads to them. But here's what's really cool. You can also click a little button, it literally takes one click, called lookalike targeting. And what Facebook will do is they'll actually find users that look just like those users on their network based on their social profile, right? Because you're targeting at a personal level now. It's not an intent-based or keyword targeting. You're targeting a persona. They'll find other personas just like that, and you can start targeting your ads to them too, right? So you can use this for direct retargeting if you want to show your existing users more content, or if you're an e-commerce company and you want to sell your existing users more products. But you can also expand your reach and hopefully gain more users. So here's a quick example, just showing you the parameters. You can upload, I guess, it's phone numbers, emails, in this case, Facebook IDs. There's another thing you can see here called a website custom audience. And this is if you're a little bit more lazy. No, I'm just kidding. But it's actually just a little bit more of an advanced technique where you can drop a pixel on your site called a website custom audience. And what this does is it actually automatically just creates that custom audience for you from your web visitors. But what's really cool about it is you can configure it with a rule. So you could say, hey, only collect the users who hit 3 of my pages. Or if you're an e-commerce company, you can say only add the users to my targeting list if they abandon their shopping cart. It's incredibly powerful. And it's, as you guys start launching your companies, you start launching your businesses, there's some really clever things to do here. For example, and don't tell anyone I told you to do this because it's actually really messed up, but when you're trying to target press, why don't you go find all the Twitter handles or Facebook handles for all the top press writers and upload them to a custom audience and target them with your brand and be like, holy shit, this startup is blowing up. I can't believe it. So finally, there's a traditional retargeting, and that's your Twitter tailored audiences. And you can use this for a couple things, right? So when you've lost your users, in this case, when we lost some of our users, we upload them to a custom audience. And we say, hey guys, you want to give this another shot? Here's a coupon, here's your code, come back and give it another try. It's really personal. You're admitting that you lost them, but you're still going to be able to have another shot at those users. This is just what a salesperson would do anyway, right? Your salesperson is going to go to your lost leads and is going to try to re-engage those users. You can do this automatically or programmatically through retargeting. You're going to also decrease the length of the sales cycle. So one thing that's really powerful, and this is only for really sophisticated marketing teams, so you guys should definitely do this, you're going to be ahead of the game. Imagine your salesperson has all these different leads, qualified leads, cold leads, so on and so forth. You can actually upload those as their own separate custom audiences and show different messaging or different content to each of the different segments. Because what you can do today as an advertiser is fundamentally help the other business units within your organization. You can help your salespeople close those leads faster because, again, they have more brand familiarity, right? And then finally, you can cross-sell. So again, if you're an e-commerce company, or if you're a company with different products, or in Red Tricycle's case, you guys have different events, or you have different things for parents to do, you can keep showing your users different things, not the same. And you can actually exclude existing users of that given piece, or someone that's purchased a given item. So here's a quick snapshot of those things side by side inside of AdStage. That's it.
How long does it take somebody from scratch to learn how to do this? If you had somebody who's technical, not like hyper-technical, but let's say they've placed an ad campaign before on Twitter, or just like some basic stuff, they're literate. How long would it take somebody to learn how to do all this stuff? And then how much to set it up, and then how much to maintain it for a startup?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is very variable, but there's a couple things you can do. So a lot of the things we actually spoke about here, some of them are really advanced techniques, but they're pretty easy, right, once you figure them out. So just go read some of the content. Like, this is exactly why companies like AdStage and other companies have built guides. The guide takes you 15 minutes to read. I guarantee you after you read one of our network guides, you'll be able to kick off a campaign on that given network. Initially, to get really advanced and start doing things that are really clever and cross-selling and using retargeting do take more time. But that's okay, because even the basic implementation, like a brand campaign, will give you benefit, right? The thing about advertising that's great is you put money in, you see what you get out of it. So if your CPA is not being covered, then forget about it, right? Or optimize your campaign.
So weeks to learn, months to learn, days to learn?
I think maybe weeks, like a few weeks. Yeah, I think it's, yeah. To kick off your first campaign, absolutely. You kick off your first campaign in a day.
So let's just say you're doing this systematically. You want to make this a best practice to the level you're doing. Is this a full-time person at a company, do you think? Do you do content marketing as well?
Well, so the reason why I started this company was because I was doing this at my last company, and it was only 10% of my time. So it doesn't have to start being a full-time person. But once you start increasing your spend, if you start diversifying and going to other networks, for example, yeah, it's absolutely worth having a full person doing this all the time. It's worth it. But of course, you can do it even before you have the capital to do it.
And how much would you suggest a startup that's raised $500,000 or $1 million put towards an effort like this?
So, like I said, I'm a really big fan of brand campaigns, so I would start with brand campaigns. And I would see how expensive your actual brand is. And then it's all about testing. This is all about testing. So kick off quick flight campaigns, quick flight meaning, or short flight campaigns. So kick off a campaign. Let's say that you have a really good piece of work. This is why content's great, by the way. Let's say you have a really popular piece of content on your blog. Use that in your actual ad campaign, right? Because you know that it's actually kind of popular, and see how it does and see what your ROI is. I think the most important thing that a lot of people, when they're novice advertisers, don't do is they don't set up conversion tracking. You're going to throw your money away if you can't track the ROI, right? Now we're in this world where conversion tracking it's there. You can use Google Analytics. It's pretty easy. Just make sure you're tracking your ROI. And then you can just test it for a bit and test it however comfortable. If you're getting let's say that your average cost per good or your average revenue per user when you get them is $50, right, per month. Let's say it's $1,000 LTV, right? And it costs $500 to acquire them. You're still good. The thing is, people freak out like $500 CPA, but your LTV is $1,000, right? So unless anything catastrophic happens, you're still net positive. And I think that's the thing where that's what's really cool about advertising. You pump money in, right? Any other questions?
The question I have about this is, if you had a choice, do you have a PR company at AdStage?
No, we are.
Okay. So if a startup is getting sold on spending $7,500 to use a PR consultant or $15,000 to use a big firm, let's say, it's probably the range. You could say it's expensive. Yeah, $5,000 to $15,000 a month. You're talking about whatever that is per year, 60 to and up, 220 maybe. If you were going to allocate that 60 to 120 and you were the CEO of the company, how do you allocate it?
If I were to allocate it to marketing, or
like you spend, $25,000 on marketing, $25,000 worth of content that's written by freelancers, how would you go about it?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And I know that you hate this answer, but it really is dependent on the business. For example, I'll be really transparent. For the longest time in AdStage, we just spent like $50 a week. right? Because we actually got a lot of businesses signing up organically through our content. We wrote our content internally, right? So I'm a big fan of paying for content, paying for design if you need it. If you don't have it internally, these things are great investments, right? Assuming that you're writing good content, you have to study good content, content for your target audience, right? If you're doing that, these are things that you can start measuring the ROI of. And then in that case, it's a smart buy, right? Just like a salesperson is a smart buy because hopefully they pay for themselves, right? So I would allocate a reasonable amount of money to designing of content. Like go look at Percolate. They're a phenomenal content company. And that's why they created a content platform. Their blog is a great example of how to really leverage content. And it's Percolate, based in New York. And we just did a webinar with them today. And they're geniuses about content. They never write about Percolate, right? They're always writing about how to become better at content marketing, right? So these things are really beneficial. I would definitely spend money on that if you can't leverage people inside your company. But honestly, you probably can. Right, the vast majority of here, for you, for example, you run a restaurant. You should absolutely be writing content about that, right? I mean, a lot of you guys can do this. For you guys are parents, I'm sure some of you are parents, you can write about this, right? So try to leverage those means because we're very frugal when we're a small company. We still are, right? Other than that, I would start allocating. It depends on what stage you are. If you guys are ready, you have your go-to-market fit, that's when I start ramping up paid. So we just started ramping up paid substantially, right? Because we're ready to sell this thing. Our product, we had our initial beta. We saw the traction, we saw the engagement rate. We know that, all right, if we spend $10,000, we're gonna get X number of customers, and they're gonna be worth this much LTV, it makes sense. So once you start getting that equation figured out through test campaigns, that's when you double down when you're ready, when your product's ready.
How much time should the CEO spend in your mind?
If you're a team, let's say that you're a team of like sub 10, a reasonable amount of time. It depends if you're the technical CEO or if you're more focused on the marketing side. I mean, I spent about 10% of my time at my last company, and we were a team of about 8 at a given time, up to 14. It just depends. If you're getting, a lot of companies grow out of virality, right? They grow from organic channels. Paid doesn't really work for them, right? For example, for Huckle, paid is going to be really tough for you guys. You're not going to want to run user acquisition on advertising. You're going to want to brand on advertising. You just want people to know your brand. You're not actually going to pay. $1 CPA is really hard to get for installs, right? And you're not going to get quality installs necessarily. So it just depends on the type of company. In our case, we're a B2B business. So we're using LinkedIn a lot, for example. It's a very expensive network. But hey, a $200 CPA, no problem, right? Because our LTV is way above that.
What's been your experience in terms of working with PR companies? How effective have those turned out for you?
Yeah, I've written content marketing about how it's a really bad idea because most of the time, journalists want to work directly with the founder, and all a PR person does in between them is cause friction and bad feelings, et cetera. So I tend to see the weak companies have PR firms, and the strong companies have CEOs who can write, and you can write an email. And we had Stanford Hotel tonight here, he told the story to the TechCrunch writers and took them out and did a video with them. So I really think it's the CEO's job to communicate the company. And like the reason the Wall Street Journal was here, for example, was sometime in November, December, I was like, we're doing a lot of stuff with this angel investing, right? And nobody knows about it. Nobody knows about this angel syndicate. So I read her, Deborah, and I just said, Deborah, I asked Bryce, my chief of staff here, to give me a chart of our syndicates' cumulative raise over cumulative months. And I just forwarded it to her and said, there's a major trend going on with this. I usually angel invest $50,000 to $250,000 per company, and now I'm having 5 to 10 times that come in from my syndicate. Nobody's covering me. That was the entire team email. You used to see them. She immediately got back to me. Can we have breakfast? We had breakfast. So we said, can I get breakfast with you again? Sure. Then a month later, can I come to this? This is the third time I've spent time with her. She's writing a major feature in the Wall Street Journal about what I'm doing. So I didn't email 20 people. I didn't have a PR person. I knew that one graph and that one piece of information that nobody else had would be journalist data, right? So I journalist data. Here's one little thing that's going to be great. Like so prevention. Those got this really cool thing. You know who's covered those companies before, or maybe he's a food critic. And I was like, hey, Mark, fit me in the New York Times, or you go to the San Francisco food critic is. We're doing something really interesting. Nobody's ever done it before. It combines these two things, and you just send a picture of the which is link page, the journal page. So I think it's lazy CEOs who get those companies. The only exception to that is when you're at scale and you have too many things coming in. There are elite people like Brooke Hammerling, who handles Larry Ellison, a bunch of other companies, Jawbone for a time, and then Brandy Barker, who was Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg's PR person. Like there are elite people who are taking all the inbound and saying no to 99 people in the Linux way, and yes, in curating the 60 Minutes or the Charlie Rose kind of thing, right? So in that case, kind of might be necessary, and money is no object. But I love I think what you're doing, Sahil, that's so brilliant is you combine the content marketing with a little bit of spend, and then this kind of like recycling of clients. And so the line between content marketing and telling your story, and the native advertising of social, you said that the content is the ad. Yeah. I have gone in and run at least 100 ad campaigns on Twitter over the past 2 years, just testing stuff. And you can do it in seconds, and it's a lot of fun. Where I just said, here are 20 other angel investors, here's the scale conference, and retweet one of our tweets. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's such small numbers, right? You spend $500 or $1,000 or $100.
I think that two things on the PR side, actually, what we did is, so we actually, in our, up to launch, and for the launch festival, we did hire someone for PR. But the person that I wasn't a big firm, it was an individual, and I made it very clear to this person that I wanted to learn about it. So a lot of people will hire a PR person so that they can take away the work, and you don't want to know about it. I actually use it, it's like, for $5,000, that's not that expensive to learn about a new trade, right? So if you can learn a little bit about the PR side, and then we brought it in-house immediately, which might be kind of messed up, but for us, it was a good way to do it. And so I had my marketing person actually handle all the interactions with the PR person and really learn what this person was doing, and then we brought it in-house. And then content marketing is really interesting because eventually, if you become a thought leader, so it was really exciting that this week, so typically we do have relationships with reporters, and that's how we've gotten a lot of our press, and when we run big press releases about funding, they'll always write about it, right? But we actually just wrote our own blog post about a new feature we launched this week, and it got picked up by Adweek, and we didn't email anyone, right? So slowly, it's gonna happen. You kind of have to trust in it. It's a long-term game. Content in general is a long-term play. We've been writing content since we started the company over 2 years ago. But we still use content from the first week that we wrote today, and that's that evergreen content. So you have to just kind of trust in it a little bit, but it's happening. It's useful.